Welcome to episode 394 of Dial the Gate, the Stargate Oral History Project. My name is David Reed. I am privileged to welcome back someone whose work I've admired for many years, and if you're watching this, you are well aware. James C.D. Robbins, production designer on Stargate Universe. He was an art director on Stargate SG-1 and Atlantis as well. This is a live stream. If you have questions for James and you're in the YouTube chat, put a question mark at the beginning of your comment, like I'm demonstrating right now. What did you think of this thing? And submit questions to him that way through me, and I will be getting them on the back end here. If you have more than one, you are welcome to submit that as well for this episode. We're not only allowing one question per person this time, because there is a lot to ask this guy, and I am thrilled to have him back. James C.D. Robbins, production designer. And you're missing a like a pineapple kind of drink or, you know, something there, sir. How you doing?
I am well. I wish this was an actual physical background, but it's merely a little thing that ships with Zoom. So,
jeez. Well,
it's where I'd rather be.
I am thrilled to have you. What's been going on before we get to the elephant in the room that Stargate's back? What have you been working on? What have you been preoccupying yourself with? What's been happening?
Film in Canada has been a little bit handicapped of late. Potential tariffs and other things, and a few years back it was strikes and what have you. And it's just been a sort of, we went from, I think in 2020 we had 72 productions shooting at one time, to the point where I recall once we actually had to push a week on a new movie I was starting because there were no trucks available at all. Period.
What?
Yeah. And now we've gone from that 72 number down to, I think there are 16 productions shooting on the ATSI list at the moment. There may be other indies things, but that's a significant drop. So there's a lot of people looking for work, and there's a lot of people finding other work. And I have large hiatuses between jobs now, so I'm getting back to what I do, which is, you know, paint. I'm a painter. That's where I started. I went to England and did my fine art training in London, and spent 4 years there. So it's all, and anytime I've been down in between films, I try and go back to my art and just stay creative.
Have you ever been in a position, I'm genuinely curious, where, because you make this this is your bread and butter, you make this your day to day, where this thing stopped being something that you love and became something that, you know what, I'm really resenting this part of myself right now, creatively speaking, like, and I am like, have you ever been close to wanting to just stop doing this thing, or has it always been a positive influence in your life, creating content, whether you're doing it with your favorite medium, which is I believe charcoal, or, you know, just Photoshop?
Well, no, there's a few questions in there.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Let me think how to best put that together. I mean, film is what I know. It has been my world since I graduated from college. I started working at a TV station in Ontario, in Toronto, and then I worked at a TV station in Winnipeg, and then I came out here and devoted myself to, you know, actual film work, and worked my way up to becoming a production designer. That said, my art is always where I go. I mean, it comes with me by default. So when I do not have productions that I'm working on, I go back to my own artwork. And yes, charcoal is part of it, but I'm an oil painter. And I try and bring my art to whatever I can do. When I'm on smaller movies, there's many occasions when I've actually done oil paintings for productions, and retained ownership of those. I try and do it so I do the paintings in my own time, so that at the end of the day, they still belong to me, and I rent them or loan them out to a production. Some productions are more open to that than others, but I've never really had any complaints, and it allows me to flex artistically, I guess, basically. Yeah, you know, like I could go out and take a photo and put it onto, just have it printed onto canvas. But if you're in with camera up close, you can see brushstrokes. There's a difference between an actual painting and a digital copy of a painting printed on canvas. So, you know, I thought if I can do whatever little things I can do to lend credibility to the environment or the scene, it's worth it. And there's been a few that have been very specifically oriented around portraiture. I did 2 different portraits for a movie. What was it? Three bed, 2 bath, 1 ghost, and it was a period piece. And it all centered around this portrait that was done of this young girl back in the 1920s. And then the portrait changed when she finally stopped being a ghost and saw the light and went through to wherever she had to go. And then the portrait changed to her and her beloved. So it was an integral story point in that particular movie. So whenever I can do that, I will do that. But the rest of the time, I love wildlife art. I spent many summers as a kid at a game farm that no longer exists here in British Columbia, but I lived on the game farm doing wildlife drawing and painting every summer. So 2 months out of every year for 4 years running. And I was up close and personal with the animals and in the cages with some of them. I actually bottle fed a lion cub for 2 months that remembered me the next year.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. It really was.
Wow.
I got to go in the cage with this thing at a year old, and it remembered my voice. And the guy who ran the game farm, Ed Lacey, says, "Well, do you want to go in and visit?" I'm like, "What? I can do that?" Because this thing's huge now.
Apex predator, man.
Right. So I go, but I was like, "Mom, this thing came in and it knocked me on my back and was like licking my neck with this sandpaper tongue and the whole bit. And Ed had to kind of pull him off so he'd let me stand up again. And then he ran around like a freaking little kitten with the scooties, you know, just like jumping all over the place. He was so excited. So, yeah, there's been some very memorable, moments that I've had. And wildlife. When I was a kid, I was doing pen and ink drawings of, cougars and lions and all the standard stuff.
Wow.
But once I got into film, that was bread, because you graduate from college with all the ideas that, I'm going to be the world's next best painter. And then you got to earn a living. So television has done that for me since 1982, I guess. I started working. Yeah, I know. The way back.
Takes me back, man. I was not born. No.
I was going to say.
82, you said, right?
Been doing this. Well, I graduated in 82. I've actually done summer jobs at CFTO TV in Toronto in 81. And then in 82, I started full time. And then we had a recession. And
right.
I wound up bartending for about a year and a half, and then moved to Winnipeg, got back into CTV network in Winnipeg, doing work for them in the art department.
Wow.
And then I left Winnipeg and moved to the coast and started doing music videos and commercials and you name it, anything I could, and worked my way up from not really knowing much about film at all to becoming a fairly seasoned designer over the 8 years before I started at Stargate. And then went backwards a little bit when I started at Stargate because the union didn't recognize the independent stuff I'd done. It wasn't in their book, so to speak. So I started as an illustrator. I was like amazed that they were going to pay me just to draw. I couldn't believe that. And one tiny correction to your intro is I was actually wound up being the designer for all 3 things. I was
you were?
Last 2 seasons of Stargate.
My apologies.
No, it's fine.
But I should have known that by now. Okay, got it. What year did Bridget, was Bridget there for season 4 and 5?
Don't ask me what year. She did season 8. I did 9 and 10. So you can figure out what years that was. And
so that's
4 and 5 of Atlantis.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. Very good.
So I wound up doing 2 years each of all of the shows because the universe didn't go beyond 2.
There we go. James C.D. Robbins, production designer, Stargate SG-1, Atlantis, and universe. I'm
Dun,
thrilled
dun,
to have
dun.
you back. I've got some fan questions popping for you. I think we should get to those first before we get to the show and tell.
Sure.
Bryce Ors, was it he who painted the picture of the city of Atlantis, the one painted by Major Lorne in Sunday, and
No,
then it later
I,
hangs
I,
over
I have that here at my house.
the original?
Yep. Going for the low, low price of. Make me an offer. Come on. There you go. Yeah, you got a print already. Where'd you get that?
I asked for your permission before I did it, and you said yes. So this came from Hobby Lobby. So
Okay, cool.
It's just,
Very nice.
it looks like
actually, it's
acrylic.
it is acrylic. That
No,
is
but
an
it looks like
acrylic.
acrylic. Yeah, I know it was, but it
Yeah, the
looks
original.
like the print looks like it could be, I mean, it's not going to pass for one when it hits the
No.
light because the light doesn't hit it. But
No, they did a great job on the colors. That looks very authentic.
exactly. Yeah, no, I think, okay, so you opened this door. So so you have the painting of Evan Lorne's painting from Atlantis.
I do.
What else of the paintings do you still possess?
From Stargate, not much. I mean, I
Okay.
did that one other painting from, oh my God, what was it called? Harmony?
Do you have
SG1?
Harmony's victory at the end?
I do not have that painting. I have found a reference to it, but that was printed on canvas and hung at the other end of the hall where the writers and
I sold
producers
that.
all lived. It went somewhere.
Yeah, I sold that, and I can tell you what it went for. It was not a song. It did pretty well. But yeah, and then there was one that I have never seen since. I've only seen it in screenshots of the show, and it is Satedan officers in their gold armor on a dark battlefield, and it's Ronon's. It belongs to him, and I've never seen an art file of it. I've never seen a reference to it anywhere other than in the episode.
I would have to see an image of it. I don't know that that's something I created. That does not ring a bell with me.
Oh, okay. It's 2 or 3 guys standing on a battlefield in their golden armor that was made really fast for Runner, and then we saw again in Sateda in the flashbacks. If someone can point out where that is, I'd love to share it.
Yeah, shoot me an image of it. I can
Exactly.
say pretty quickly whether I did that or not. I mean, I did so
Absolutely.
many drawings
If anyone's
and renderings.
If anyone has an eye on the Satedan painting or a screenshot of it, they can send it to me at dialthegateshow@gmail.com. I'll give you credit for it right now if you're in the live chat away they go, because that's it's a tremendous image, and I'm really curious if you could see it and just be like, oh yeah, that was so and so, because you had a couple of folks under you as well, didn't you?
Well, I primarily, I mean, I was hired on, like I say, in season 6 as the illustrator. And then when I became art director, I kept on doing all the illustrating. They didn't hire an illustrator, and I did it for both shows. And then when I became designer, I kept doing my own, because that's how I design. It's like a visual way of getting everything understood by all parties. And it seemed very redundant to me to hire an illustrator that would maybe give me something close to what I had in my head when I can actually output exactly what I have in my head. So it just keeps the through line clean.
That's the thing that, and I think I've articulated this to you before. The thing that always amazed me, and Martin Garrow said it to me, was I can think up something in my head, and I can write it down on paper, and I can have a conversation with the art department about it, and within a couple of weeks, I can freaking hold it. Like, that's kind of awe-inspiring. That's wild.
It is the magic. I mean, designing sets, I mean, how many props did I design over the years? And they'd bring me axes, and they'd bring me, Ronon's gun and the blade that he carried. I mean, all this stuff. And I never got over the excitement, like the childlike excitement almost. I'm like, oh, look at this. This is so cool. But that's also because you've got a team of incredibly talented people I mean, you can hand anything off to somebody, and what you get back is not necessarily what you put out. And I've experienced that since Stargate on many occasions where I've anticipated that level of perfection or just talent, and it's fallen short in certain cases. And it's just like, oh, okay. And I really start to appreciate the world that we lived in there, where the talent that they amassed on that show, it was all the way through. It wasn't just a couple guys at the top that knew what they were doing. It was everybody who was on that show brought so much to it. So they were very fortunate. But you go that many years and you redefine your infrastructure, and everything becomes in-house, a model shop. They had, we were the first ones to start doing 3D scanning and stuff back when it was like unheard of. And they had their own water cutting machines to create stuff we could work with almost any material. Yeah, it was unbelievable. It really was. I was very lucky.
Martin Wood and like some of the producers would go off to these shows and find out, like these trade shows, about some of the new machines that were being created to fabricate things, and they'd be like, guys, we saw this weekend, should we get one? Oh, it's a couple $100,000. Yeah, we'll make it work. it's like well, we can use it to do this and that and that. So there's only just so much that you can do with what it is that you have, and then someone comes along and creates something. You can create these new tools come along, and your eyes kind of open wide. It's like, well, there are some possibilities here. I've got the image for you. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
ring any bells now?
It does. It wasn't me.
Okay.
Possibly Rodrigo, Chris Beach. I'm not sure.
Wow.
I'm not sure. Wow. I do recall the image now. I have seen that before, but it was not created by me.
Yeah, he had it hidden in his dreadlocks along with all the throwing knives when he fled from Sateda. So, or I think more likely he had Lorne create it for him, and they had long conversations about what it would have looked like. And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, he's a runner. You can't exactly take paintings. But of course, at the end of the day, they did go back to Sateda, so maybe he went back to his boss's place, whom he shot and killed, and nabbed it. That's probably what happened.
Who knows? Not every single aspect of the storyline is entirely thought out.
That's it. And that's Bryce Orrs, who created the opening sequence for this. He was actually the one who went and made that. This is actually a little bit of a better shot of it here, but whoops. Thank you.
Man. I don't know. World. I mean, it's vague. Maybe I did. Like I say, so many images.
That's the thing.
Thousands of drawings.
Thousands. Raj Luthra is asking, and I want to figure out how I want to phrase this. The design and the idea comes from the writer, obviously. You get to mold it and shape it into something that can be created, and then it gets to be actually brought into the physical or digital space, depending on what it is, by another department. I'm curious if there are any stories that you remember, not from writer to you, but from you to the model shop, where they were creating something and they had to come back and say, this was not, like, we're having a hard time cracking this. Like things like the drone weapon in Atlantis, it's just got the tentacles are just each link in the chain is its own piece, or was there a prop that was, or a design element that was like, it's crystallized, it's right here, and they went and did it. I'm curious if anything stands out to you after all this time.
Well, there were a couple things. One of the first things that I drew up for SG-1 was it was in the gate, hung in the gate room, and it was to counteract the ancient weapon that Anubis was firing into the gate.
Yep, and
And
it did
it was an
this.
it was a pulse generator, exactly. And what I did in my drawing was just, I did a rendering of it. So I'm like, this is other people's problems. And then Bridget said, now draw it up so they can build it. And I'm like, okay. Drafting, that's, I've done that, but my God, it was a long time ago. So I figured it out through looking at other drawings that were in the art department as how to draft again. And I had put two, basically, there were two things that were on the same axis going in opposite directions, two spinning wheels. And the special effects guys, Ray and company, figured out how to do it. So that was pretty amazing. But the only other thing, I mean, the model shop was especially under Gordon, it was unbelievable what they could do.
Gord Bellamy.
Yeah, love Gord. But what was it? It was a bracelet that, there you go. There's a very detailed drawing. Kind of get the idea of what it's supposed to be.
We work with what we got. Are you referring to the bracelets that Vala and Daniel wore, the gold ones?
Yes. Yeah. So, okay. My wife, years before, I had bought her this fur bracelet, but it was a stick. And basically, as soon as you go and hit your arm with it, it just wraps automatically. And I loved the action of it. So I managed to go find these things, and we brought a couple in, and the guys in the model shop tried to reverse engineer it, but we're unable to. And I think that was the only time that I drew something that they were just like, oh, I don't know. And that became a much more involved version of it. Look at you finding this stuff so fast. And I'm not sure now. It's so long ago. I don't actually recall how we did it, whether we did a flat one and had just a formed bracelet that they wore, which is probably the most likely thing.
Exactly, and a visual effect transition.
Yeah. And once again, it's been a couple of years. So,
for sure.
I beg your forgiveness if I don't remember all the details of how all these things panned out.
No, there was some. Look at that! It's got like it's got like a little face in it with the pinchers and everything. I've never really paid a lot of attention to this. Glowing gems should be dimmable. The fact of the matter is, I have a number of these things in my house with the concept art hanging with them, and every single one of your notes, pretty much, I can't think of any that don't, are addressed in what was created largely. It's like they didn't look at it as like it'd be great if you could do this. It's like, no, this is what the production designer wants. We're going to find a way to make this work. And if we can't, we're going to have a conversation.
Beyond that, though, David, it's not just what I want. I do the drawings, and those all have to be signed off by the executive branch, the writers, Brad, Rob, whomever it was, Paul and Joe. They all had to sign off on this stuff. And at the end of the day, yeah, they were making my drawings come to life, but they were doing that on behalf of the production because this is what had been agreed to. So you can't. Okay. There's no point in doing a very specific, detailed drawing if they give you something that's kind of over there and isn't really representative of it, or doesn't. And a lot of the time, it's how the physical piece works. It has to perform in a certain manner on camera. So they were brilliant. Paco Don, Gord Bellamy, the gang. They just, there was nothing they couldn't do except for that one bracelet thing. That's a pretty good hit-miss ratio, I would say. Their batting average is 99.9.
We can make like weapons. We can create, along with Todd Masters' team, we can create alien races. A bracelet, that is one bridge too far. So I would think that every once in a while they would come up with something that's like, this is amazing stuff that you create. This one trips you up, and I'm honestly surprised. Occasionally it would have to be like, this was what you guys stuck on this one?
Yeah.
I'm honestly surprised that this is a troublesome thing for you. But
And so was I, because it's the last thing I want is to draw something they can't build, right?
yeah,
It's like, gotcha. Oh, damn.
was there ever?
What's the analogy is like watching your ex-wife drive off a cliff in your brand new car. It's like, yeah, oh, damn.
What? Now there's an image. When you're creating these things, is there part of your mind that's like, oh, I want to put this down because this is part of not what they were asking. Like the guys, they're asking for 1 through 5. I'm assuming you're allowed to make 6, 7, and 8 in terms of this design as well, because not like adding functionality onto something, but you want it to articulate a certain way. It's like something that the model shop would create. Is that typical, or is it like, no, they've asked for 1 through 5 on this. Time is money. I'm going to give them 1 through 5. Like in terms of like designing a weapon.
Well, I mean, I had read the script, so I know how the weapon needed to perform.
Yes.
And I would have that obviously forefront of my mind when I'm drawing these things up. But on top of that, I would add my own iterations, if you will. Like Ronon's gun, for example, is a perfect iteration. Started off from a Peacemaker, 1800s pistol, and redefined it, and then put the shell into it that glowed, thinking this is an energy shell, and he would have a bandolier potentially. Maybe he carries extra energy shells with him, or there's some way to tune this thing up. And then the 3 different settings, I just put that on. That wasn't scripted in the first place. But the 3 different settings of, what was it? Incinerate. Yeah, there you go. Amber is stun, red kill, and green is incinerate. So I'm not sure that, I think they kind of backed into 2 settings on the final gun. And I don't
think we ever saw him incinerate anything other than a piece of paper that he was shooting at as a target. That was gone.
No, there was a female. Oh, she shot through a door with it to get out.
Okay.
So
wow.
If she hit a person with that, if she'd hit a person with that, that probably is, metal.
Wouldn't have had a good day.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe that was the incinerate mode, but they didn't specifically put that in as a scripted thing. But I put the little bells and whistles on, and even if these things don't get addressed specifically, it just adds a little more eye candy to the piece. It makes it a more interesting prop to look at and play with. And my understanding was that Jason quite liked that gun. He became very good with it after a while, like a gunslinger.
It's oversized. I've held it, but it's not for him. It fits him completely, along with that great big piece of cow that the costume designer put him in. It was Valerie Halverson. I mean, it's just so outsized, but he wears it. It's not wearing him, And it's the same with the props.
I was fortunate because I met him in person right before I was assigned to create this weapon for him. And I've heard of him at that point, but they said, "Oh, he's really big." I went and met him. I'm like, "Holy crap!" Okay, this gun is going to have to be large. That's all there is to it. A big boy like this doesn't want a little gun. So that's what we came up with, and that was out of the park right from the get-go. He loved it. Production loved it.
He did. And there are scenes.
And the nice thing was, it doesn't key. In other words, he can't press a button that makes it light up, because production hates that. Because then if they hit it by mistake, all of a sudden they either have to send a blast out from the gun or erase it in post. Which
digitally, that would be such a pain in the ass. I remember Bruce Woloshyn talking about the Wraith. They were like bazookas. They put them over their shoulders and they fire with them. And Model Shop had designed a light at the end and a depressible button. And it worked. I think they worked for us as well. They just existed in the first season. They went and upgraded to the pistol version. You made a more practical version of it. But Bruce was like, yeah, every time that they light that, we either have to digitally remove the light or because it locks us in terms of when the shots come in, like these things have to articulate that way. And if you're looking really closely, I think one of my favorites is there's an episode in season 8 called Sacrifices where Teal'c'ss is doing, he's made a double-ended staff weapon by tying these things together. And he's running and doing this. And the staff blasts conveniently go exactly where he wanted them to, even though 90% of the time the staff wasn't properly aimed that way. So, like my dad says, you gotta buy it. And there's only so much that you can pull off when you're executing things that way. You just got to tell the story that you're going to tell.
Exactly. And when you have a portal that has a sideways swimming pool in it that takes you to other planets, the level of believability, I think, you can play with that a bit.
Yeah, you got to make it worth it. That's it. The mandate first and foremost is be entertaining. And Bryce went and wrote me, found it season 4 DVDs for, is it season 4, Bryce? Let me show this. Season 4 DVD disc number 1. And here it is one more time in all of its full glory here. I'm curious if those folks are anyone specific. Do you recognize those guys at all?
Oh my God.
Anything stand out?
I can't say I did or didn't have a hand in it. There's no signature on it, obviously. So
no, this one doesn't have a signature. Yeah, I mean the people in it.
I would have to go back. Which episode is that?
Bryce, which episode is this? It's probably I would think there's a good chance that. Let's have a look here, because this is fun. This is what we do. Over here on. Sorry, Darren. Let's see. Atlantis season 4. I think that may be the episode Reunion. That's got to be Reunion 403. Yeah, because that's the one with Mark Dacascos.
Reunion.
So, yeah, that's it. So I was just curious if you recognize the guys standing in the shot.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, yes, I have seen it. Did I do it?
For sure.
I don't recall. You would think,
it's still cool.
I would remember.
Absolutely. Anyway. Let me see here. Lockwatcher. I was able to acquire a production print from PropWorks of the prosthetic Wraith arm from the Atlantis pilot. How did that develop, and how were they used in production? Because that one actually crawled across the ground, I think.
Severed limb. After they took down one of the Wraith darts, I think they
correct.
Found the limb. And,
that's right.
Knowing that we were going to get close on that, I designed that with all the metallic finger cots and the whole bit. And the guys came back, and of course, it had to have the feeding thing in the palm. There's the drawing. So we started that, and I don't think they gave the finger cots to anybody except the Wraith Queen at the end of the day.
Yes. Now, Andee looked at these as like armor to protect herself when she would close her hand. And I think that they served like a dual purpose as well, because they could slice open clothing. Not that you needed the clothing removed for them to do whatever it was that you called the sucking life, or whatever it was that you called that. But was there any, what are these things meant for in general?
To me, it was an adornment. That was all.
Okay.
I didn't see it as having strong function. Yes, I mean, obviously they were sharp-ended, and if you're in a cat fight with someone who's wearing those, you're going to lose.
Well, 2 queens, yeah.
There's a scene we never saw.
Exactly. No, for sure. Yeah, she looked at that as when they close their hand up, they're protecting their most vital organ, which, I mean, when you think about that, that really does make sense.
Sure.
If they're too low on life, they're not going to regenerate that easily.
And you know what? And that's part of the beauty of it. I do these drawings, and then they live another life beyond whatever I had in my mind, because the director has his input on it, and the actors that wear them. Not in this case, no one was wearing it, but it just have other people can spin to their heart's content, and if it's something that works, then great, move forward with it. But they did
Absolutely.
a great job building that. They brought that actual prosthetic arm to me at the end of it, and I'm like, shut up. It was just had that soft, dead flesh feel to it too. It
God.
was it was crazy. Yeah, nothing they
Um,
couldn't do.
let's stick around with the Wraith for a little bit here.
Okay,
Uh,
yeah, it's fun.
let's start with the Queen.
Oh,
The gal from the top. I'm curious if this was the image that you really began with. What when you
oh no,
conceptualized the Wraith? What shot really is the one that?
you. Nobody has ever seen the earlier versions. They
Oh,
they uh, they stayed with me,
okay,
and rightly
okay,
so, because they were really nothing arable. I mean, I started out with the Wraith as something that would have had to have been almost a complete digital fabrication. The first drawing that I did was out of a horror movie rather than, you know, a pilot where you can put a person in a suit and do the thing. And then got some, notes very quickly on no, no, not like that. It's got to be a person the whole bit. And she's super tall and she's super scary. And so I gave her cat eyes and came up with the idea of putting the pits, the sensory pits, like a snake, in their faces. Um, and there were various incarnations: old, wrinkled, young, bald, uh,
yeah,
all sorts of different incarnations of what they could look like. And then that drawing came out, and the initial one, she had white hair when I
okay,
did the drawing of the Wraith Queen. And then they said, no, 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 there you go. So that was the original version. And then they said, no, no, we're going to make her a copper top. So I basically just redid that drawing and changed the hair to the red color, and that's
wow,
that's what we got.
wow.
And and they never did the headpiece. That was kind of
They
sad about that, because
didn't.
once again, yeah, there is a thing at Stargate, and different people you talk to had different takes on it. But basically, the adage was, hats are stupid. So whenever you could avoid having some sort of headgear, they would potentially choose to avoid it. I thought that was more like an extension of the um, decorative stuff that, like, she had on her fingers and what have you. They don't really wear jewelry per se, but it was also like a crown that only she would wear because she was the queen, the keeper. But
Well, do you
for
realize
whatever
why?
reason,
I can tell you why. Because the last time that there was a keeper on the show, and his name was the keeper, his hat was this.
yeah,
So I'm not surprised they would have thought that hats were stupid.
yeah, I don't know
I'm
where that
sorry.
came from.
Probably Egyptian mythology or something there, but it's Dwight Schultz in
Well,
season two.
yeah, I
Story.
don't recall that particular hat, but as you say,
That was 1999. So yeah,
oh,
98,
oh,
99.
season. Oh, yeah, gotcha,
Way
gotcha.
earlier. Yeah, in
Yeah,
SG1.
yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
But yeah, the Andee often talked about, like, there are only so many women who are her height and her shape who could pull that off. And I don't know if it was in relation to, can I please have this clothing because I can actually wear it? Probably not, because she wouldn't probably be able to take it out of a dominatrix bedroom. But there was her body type was so specific. Like, you're either going to find this person or you are not, And
Yeah.
then on top of that, they have to act their asses off. It's one thing to find the shape, which you can do relatively easily, but then to find an actor to portray that character in a certain way. When you were creating this thing, what do you recall were the notes from Brad and Rob? Did they say vampire? Did the word vampire ever enter the equation? I'm really curious. Like, what were they going for?
Well, certainly not in a traditional sense of
Yeah.
what people take to be vampires. Um, I just did a vampire movie about a year and a half ago. It's so dark. It's great. but vampires.
It's so dark. It was great.
It was. They, vampires feed, and the way that everybody knows, they have fangs and they suck your blood. And these guys were vampiric, but they sucked your essence, your soul out, your life force out. And obviously not in the standard way either, through this palm feeding device that they have. So that would be the only correlation to vampires, I would think. But I mean, I wanted her to be beautiful and scary at the same time, and super strong. And this was done before anybody had been cast.
Yep.
So she's got this giraffe neck on her.
She sure does.
Think of Audrey Hepburn or Morena. She was very much like Hepburn, I thought.
Baccarin, yeah.
And so I mean, I threw that together, and this became the direction that all the other departments who weighed in on this were working from. So once again, it's just creating some sort of unified direction that everybody can take and run with and amalgamate at the end, so that you've got what the producers, writers, directors were looking for, and helping to push the story forward.
Here's the male version.
There's the male version, exactly. And once again, they came out with something that was very, very similar to this at the end of the day. The one thing they didn't do were the ears, which I thought...
Oh, I see that now.
Yeah, be a way to dehumanize them. So that was just going to be too much to do on every actor that had to come through and be a Wraith. So.
Yeah, I talked with James Lafazanos about this character, because he hissed a lot, and
that's what they do.
That's what they do. So these came from a snake. Were they more olfactory, like smelling fear, sensing fear?
That's what I had in my mind when I did it. It's like, so you could be in a dark room, and it doesn't mean they're not going to find you. You know what I mean? Because they can sense heat perhaps with them, or life force with them, but it's kind of like a secondary smell or olfactory sense.
Wow. This is interesting. It doesn't take up the whole face. It takes up just the top here.
Yeah.
This is one of the coolest guys. He stands downstairs in my dining room.
Dan Shea.
Dan Shea. Yeah. Very much. There's the Wraith Bazooka.
Oh, that's what you're calling the bazooka. Okay, cool.
Yes. Exactly.
The pointy bit.
Was this always a self-destruct device from the beginning, or did that only take place? Did it only manifest itself 3 or 4 episodes later in Suspicion, or was that you just wanted to add that then? Okay.
I think the writers just took that and said, "Hey, that could be," and went with it. I didn't have any distinction on that. All I was trying to do is get the sense that there was some mechanics underneath a translucent shell, and that potentially that was adding to their strength or their abilities.
Eye holes to be
see-through.
Are weird. That's it. Yeah. So there were 2 versions of these that I am aware. For the first few years they were all like a rubber, and then you guys had a couple of versions where we finally see the drones getting born, and they don't have them on their faces. They add them on as after birth, and then it just sucks onto their faces. But I'm not sure who it was who said it. It may have been you. It may have been Bridget. I'm trying to remember. They went to set with the masks, and there were no eye holes in the masks. The model shop needed to take drills and make the holes so that Dan Shea and company could see, because it'd be kind of nice if they could see.
Dan Payne. Sorry, Dan Payne.
Dan Payne did.
right? Yeah, he was one of the
Yeah,
first
sorry,
Wraith
sorry,
ones.
Dan Shay. Yes, I
I
apologize. Dan
said
Payne.
yeah.
Dan Shay was Dan. No, I think you said Dan. I think you were
I
right.
said I said yeah. I had it wrong.
Dan Shay was over on SG1. Yeah, but
Yeah,
Dan Payne was the bigger guy who's the call warrior and everything else.
exactly.
It's a remarkable piece to look at, and it really like it's important to factor those kinds of details in because I would think it would be relatively easy to overlook something like that. It's like, yeah, this is going to be worn on a person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why I made the notes in there in the first place, so that there
Exactly.
was like you know you've got to do something here. These guys obviously need to be able to see, and even with what they did, drilling the holes the way they did, very limited viewing for whoever happened to be wearing that.
Mm-hmm.
So you try not to put the actors through hell, but sometimes it's. And Dan was a trooper because he like the Cull Warrior thing. I think I've told you the story about Evolution where he overheated wearing that neoprene.
Yeah,
was,
and buried himself in dirt for held his breath for a huge amount of time to pull that off. I don't even think he heard. I think it was Deloise. I don't even think he heard Peter say action. It's like, I think he knew something, and he came up and they got it in one take. Thank God. So this is a little bit more detailed view on this. I love this. This is one of those details that they didn't really illustrate on screen. I was thinking, they were going to do like this, and then it would come and open, and that really is articulated in this particular shot here, which just I love.
Think of a Venus flytrap.
Exactly right. Glowing tendrils protrude from pores surrounding the palm vent. They whip out in a frenzy with lights that pulse toward the ends. You missed your true calling as a novelist. I'm just saying. This is so cool because I think it would have the small nails that held the vent shut now assist in adhering to their victim as they feed. And you've got all these little tendrils and pulsating things around it. This is cool, man. This is just you going to town.
Well, and honestly, that's what I did with every one of these things. And wherever I was able to, I had to, in this case, pardon the pun, I had to flesh it out, right? So that it has to live for me too. Like, how does this do it? It's got to function in a certain way. I never knew if they were going to see that action actually happen, and as it turns out, I don't think they did really.
No, not this.
They just showed the hand going up against the chest.
Yeah, exactly.
Start screaming, and when they get old really fast, then you understand what's going on.
Absolutely.
And being able to give life back, that was a cool thing too.
That was a great twist. That was like one of those, because we see all the young folks with them in the second season, the Wraith worshippers, and we're like, who are these people and why are they all kids? And it wasn't like, I don't even think they knew then that that's what it was doing. Like these were beings whom they gave back their life to. That came in season 3, a great episode with Chris Heyerdahl, who explained that you don't know as much about us as you think. It's the best Wraith episode of all of them in terms of character development.
Heyerdahl was awesome. He played more than one Wraith, I think.
He sure did, and Todd, yeah, for sure. That was the main one, but he's impossible to get on this show because he's so busy, and it's like, how can I feel bad? The dude is doing what he loves. So one of these days we'll get him. But this is some cool stuff here. Let's look at. Let me see if I can get this. This is the backside of the piece. Yep. What is this? Do not remove. What does that mean? Like just do not remove from this location?
I have no idea. That is not an internal stamp, to my knowledge. Okay. That might have been after we wrapped it. Somebody else took hold of it.
Okay, got it. Yeah, this is the back of the carapace, and you've got like several layers.
Because you got to do both sides. That's all.
That's it.
What would it look like from behind? So there you go. It's the same thing I did with the head: side, back, front.
Exactly. And here's what it looks like underneath with the plastic shell removed. Just really busy and mechanical. Let's look at some of their hardware. Let's take a look at the big kahuna here. Bruce Woloshin actually said to me during production on season 1 They weren't sure if they ever were going to show the Hive ship itself because the thing was so gargantuan in size that it would just dwarf anything in it would eclipse anything in it. And this was actually rendered for the pilot because you have to whoops, hang on just a second here if I can get my stuff right. There it is. You have to show a certain amount of it outside of the ground because it had grown into the mountainside. It laid there dormant for so many thousands of years that trees literally
had grown on it. Exactly. And that was scripted. That was from Brad. This thing had been grounded and the Wraith were asleep, and it had obviously been asleep long enough for trees to actually grow on top of this ship. And then when it pulled out of the ground, there was going to be this hole. And I think I did a charcoal drawing of that, but that's as far as it got. But I did a complete drawing with the ship on the ground. There you go.
You had to start with what was underneath.
Gives you a sense of the scale of the whole thing. Little tiny trees or great big trees growing on it makes it look like a mountainside rather than anything until you get close and you can see the lights and stuff, which theoretically would have started popping on after we interrupted their sleep.
Yeah, someone's at the door. Can someone please get it? So this is I'm curious as to what point the design of the Hive ship just evolved. I guess it was later on in the first season.
Well, I don't know that this ever aired. I don't know if that version ever aired.
That version did not.
No, because we came back after a break and saw the Viz Effect versions, and went to Brad and was like, "Well, what happened? What happened to the race ships? Those don't look anything like what I do." And he says, "Yeah, no, we tweaked them a bit, kind of, basically."
I see.
So whether it was they were just too bony, I don't think the scale changed. I think they were still massive ships.
They were,
but that version, or the Bridget had said, let's do the Wraith ships like bird skulls. So that's where it started from. So the bony exterior, the whole, and I really like the flow of it because nature, you're taking nature's designs and playing with them. So everything flowed beautifully, I thought. And I love that close side view where you can see the sort of like cross section of a bone with all the So
is the front to the left?
Yes.
So it kind of reminds me of a fish. That's
a fish.
A fish. And then the darts. We've got some darts here.
And the darts were very much just a bird's skull that I went all the way through, and I did 3 incarnations. So it was the charcoal drawing, then I did one that was sort of metallicized of it and simplified a bit, and then this version is the final that had the cockpit thrown in. So you could reasonably expect somebody to be able to pilot this thing. So it's simplified over 2 or 3 iterations.
Man, there's so much that goes into conceiving and giving birth to something like this. I don't know how you managed to get through the volume of work. I mean, something like the drawing of that arm, would that have taken, a day, a couple of days? Like, how do you, I guess, in terms of, you have to prioritize your time somehow.
Well, yeah, and especially later when I was designing and doing. I mean, at the first season that I was there, all I did was draw. So I had all day, every day, all day long. And I would go home and draw some more.
Wow.
But I mean, a couple of days maybe for the Wraith arm. I mean, they all differ in complexity of. I remember doing one for. Which was was it Trio that was the underground mining?
The Genii mining ship, yep.
Yeah.
Went way over budget.
I did drawings just of the rock face opposite and stuff where the tunnel came out at the bottom that ultimately they swang into, and the whole. I did those drawings took me over a week to do, which is an inordinate amount of time. But I wanted to sometimes it's how much realism am I trying to achieve in the drawings. There's not probably not one drawing that I wouldn't go back to and want to finish because time was the enemy. So I get them to the point where they say what they have to say and then push them onto production because I've already got a script for the next thing, or I've got 5 more things in that episode that I have to do as well. So time management became a large part of it. But a lot of these drawings could be realized to a much higher degree, basically.
Man, oh man, Lockwatcher went in ahead and sent over the shots of his collection. So
that's it's also got the do not remove on it. That's so weird.
It sure does. Yeah, it's a production thing. Yeah, it must be from the drafting boards in the different rooms where it was in. So, and this is season 2. This is the Trinity.
Trinity, yeah.
Yeah. Project Arcturus, it was. Pipe structures and tiered pedestal to tie into existing mat. Yeah, there's so much that's involved here. Matthew Hammond wants to know if you were asked what we're just asking you, what do you think is your design pinnacle in Stargate, like all of your production work? If you could hang one item from Stargate in a space that you care about, I'm curious which you would pick. I've seen so many of your beautiful charcoal designs, like the Unas have taken all of the Jaffa materials and they've made like this shrine against their enemies to get that's one of the coolest things that I ever saw. Like, what do you think back on? It's like, yeah, I'm really cool of that about I really thought that was cool. If I could have a piece of that to hang, I'm curious, what would it be? What would you pick?
Oh wow. From the thousands of drawings.
Exactly. You're talking why isn't this coming to your head right now? Yeah.
Artwork as opposed to just which finished sets or pieces I like?
From a conceptual phase. It says, what is your magnum opus is what he's really indicating. So I suppose you could look at it both ways. Yeah. In terms of a finished product, in terms of what you created on paper or on the screen digitally that you loved the most.
Well, I got to say, the very first drawing that I was set to do for Stargate was it Anubis's weapon? Is that the baddie who was that big, huge thing with the firing thing that we had to get the electromagnetic pulse generator to try and defeat?
Yes.
But it was an exterior, and Bridget had come up with a design for these shapes that would run all the way around it. And this is the first time I saw one of my drawings transformed into a Visifect that, was used over and over from different angles. I believe was it Raytak that took a dart and not a dart,
Ryak. He did like a strafing run with it.
Yeah, there you go. So I mean, that I spent a lot of time in that drawing. I wanted to be able to indicate that there was a lot more, as much underground as there was above ground, which is why it had this chasm that had like cut through part of it. And once again, I mean, and that's the thing. The model shop was able to make stuff. The set decorators and construction people were able to make it. But Visifex, oh my God, the work that they did was stunning, outstanding, all the way through. And yeah, so once again, you can see with this thing, I spent a bunch of time trying to figure out what this all looked like. And I mean, that was just, for me, that was so much fun. Oh my God, look at this thing, it's alive.
So you'd never seen any of your stuff created like that before? It wasn't just it was the first time on Stargate.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's one of the someone else did that drawing, but that's
sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But that's the same units. That was where they broke through and were able to get inside, was because that unit had split apparently. So the shield keeping them out was not intact in that spot. I believe that was the storyline. I'm only going back 25 years.
Oh, for sure. Only that much time. Absolutely. Raj also wanted to know, because you brought this up at the beginning, and I want to make sure that we cover it because it's something that's in development for you right now. Uh, are you on social media anywhere, or do you have a website so that we can, look back on your work that's in development, or your archive of work?
I have not had a website for a number of years. I did have one, and had a lot of. It was primarily Stargate, and I just got busy doing other things, and then wasn't paying attention, and it went down. And I never didn't resurrect it, so I've just created a website. Finished it a couple of days ago, I guess, for the most part. But I have yet to add my Stargate work to that website. I'm going to be doing that, but that's more James Robbins artist rather than film guy per se. But
Okay.
I can't ignore the impact that film has had even on the way I paint now. I mean, I love narrative works. I mean, you see, for example, and this is not saying I'm great or I'm better than the other
Yeah.
guy, but I have a different way of coming to it. I think the world probably has enough paintings of lion heads and tiger heads and things like that. So if I was to do a wildlife painting of a lion or a tiger, I want it to be in an environment. I want it to be telling a story and look like a moment out of the life of that animal, rather than just be a decorative. Oh, here's a lion head, here's a tiger head, here's whatever, disembodied and with no, I don't know, story quality to it. So I did one painting which I quite like, and it's now gracing someone else's walls happily. But Charles Dickens, the this Miss Havisham, are you familiar?
No, I am not.
Okay,
But my
so
favorite book is A Christmas Carol. So
okay, and I can't believe I'm gapping right now. Great Expectations, pardon me.
hmm.
So in the story Great Expectations, I mean, I'll make this very quick.
You're okay.
There's this old crone of a woman who invites this young kid to come and play at her house with her niece, and she's lives in this mansion, and the mansion is decrepit and falling apart, and she's wearing a wedding dress that is literally rotting off of her body. She's like 80 and a spinster and nasty, and she's mean spirited. And there is a layout in the big dining room of a wedding that never happened. And the cake is moldering and there's cobwebs on it and the whole bit. It's just this spooky, crazy environment.
Wow.
And I was like, in the story, this woman lost her mind when she was jilted on her wedding day. And she stopped all the clocks in the house at the moment she got the letter, and became this over life, became this embittered old crone. And I'm like, wow, what would she have been like? What would that moment have been like? So I did a 5 foot by 6 foot oil painting, a canvas of her holding the letter in her hand as a young, beautiful woman with a veil over her face. And there's an upturned chair and there's wine spilled on the table. And it was just, for me, I just loved that moment. It wasn't specifically in the book, but it was alluded to in the book. And it's kind of like, between the scenes, if you will.
You
So
have to
I did.
figure out who these people are. And if you have a traumatic experience like, being stood up on your wedding day, or anything remotely like that, it would transform you forever. And the right person, or should I say the wrong person, it would break them,
Yeah.
and
And that was a major part of what made Miss Havisham who she was in the story, and how it affected the main character, little Pip, and
wow.
his, yeah. So, but at any rate, I mean, it's not often that I read a story and I have those little. I mean, I could see the painting in my head when I was reading the story. So I just thought I
Do you
got to do this. I got to put that down.
do you find that the more of it you do, the easier it is to manifest stuff ahead of time in your mind, or is it the opposite? I'm curious, because Neil Acree, the last surviving composer for all three Stargates, I had that conversation with him a while ago, and he said, "No, the more you feed it, the more like you want to do. It is a muscle that it just gets stronger and stronger."
I would agree with that. I mean, no matter what I'm designing now, whether it's for a movie or whether it's my own personal paintings, um, I spent a lot of time in the prep period getting something that I feel is going to tell the story I wanted to tell. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, once you've been down that path, it's easier to find the path again. You know.
Wow.
I don't know if
I
that answers the
have,
question.
it absolutely does. I have something here that you're going to recognize.
Oh, there you go.
So this
That was
was an
fun.
image, right?
That was several
Originally?
images.
Several.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, Joe Flanagan was not available to be photographed with David and, oh my goodness, I don't remember her name.
Yeah, Jodelle
Joan?
Furland.
Odell, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
So I had the two of them, and this is just on the lot out in at the bridge. I took them out, and he had his P90, and they posed like that in front of me, and I took their shots. And then I had to leave room to put Joe cowering in the background because this is Rodney's story, I guess, or
Of
Rodney's
course.
her version.
His heroic
of,
moment. Yeah,
yes,
that's her version of her victory.
yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Pardon me. So I put that together. But those are photographs that I manipulated to look more like paintings. And I would actually, one of the things that I thought about doing was taking this and actually turning it into an actual oil painting, which I think potentially might have value. But I personally do not have a large high-res image of that. After all that I did, I have no idea where that image went. It's probably on a disc somewhere, but
I can I think we took a pretty high quality image of the painting, and I can at least get that to you.
cool,
And I do
cool.
have that. The photographer of all of the props and I came to an agreement a few years ago, and I purchased copies of all of the images that we took for an upcoming project. You heard it here, folks. But yeah, I will get that to you and kick me in the pants if I haven't in the next couple of days here, because I know
Oh
exactly
yeah,
where it's
well,
at.
honestly, no rush. I've got a bunch of canvases already planned that I'm working on, so I'm not in a
Uh,
hurry to
oh, for
get to it.
sure.
But to have it in my hands would be great.
That's the thing. Now, do you know how much it sold for? Or tell me how much you think it might. Well, that's not fair
No, no,
asking
no,
the
no. I'm not
artist
going to play
that.
that game. What
Okay.
did it sell for? Come on. Well, that's depending on the size, that's around what I sell a lot of my original paintings for.
Yeah. So it's 82 inches tall. So what is that? That's 6 feet, 7
Ooh,
feet. So
it's original
it's pretty
scale then.
enormous.
Yeah.
Exactly.
See,
Yeah,
if
no,
that was an
it
original,
was the original piece that was
yeah,
hung
but an
on the wall
original,
there.
yeah, if I were to do a painting of that scale, the price would be a little higher than that. Because what
Exactly.
it comes down to at the end of the day is you have to look at, a bunch of evaluations for pricing paintings and stuff like that. Some people do like just a set price per square inch of canvas. And I'm like, well, I just look at how long did it take me to do and what would
Right.
be a reasonable wage for me to anticipate for having spent my time that long and things. So some things like that, the painting I was telling you about with Miss Havisham, I got it to a certain degree of finish, and then it sat for 8 years. And
Wow.
I finally went back last year and finished it because I had somebody telling me they wanted it very badly, and I accommodated them.
Where is it listed somewhere? I mean, something like this. How do people know that that's a thing? At first, I thought it was like something from production. Then you said you hung on to it. How do people become aware of these things? Were you doing shows at the time? What's the process there for something
You
like that?
mean
Miss
my
Havisham?
paintings, my
Right.
personal painting?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the process is I had no process. I was just doing the paintings. I
Okay.
was the awful marketer, so I'm doing paintings and pretty much word of mouth and or a little bit of Facebook, and getting little to no traction. So I've built a website now, and I have prints for sale, and I have originals for sale on my website. And,
So that is on its feet right now.
yeah, if you want to go to oh my God, jamesrobbinsfineart.com.
You can't. Oh my!
I did not intend on this being a plug. Oh my God!
I did not ask you. I wanted to see it, and thank you for it, because I am a fan of your work, and fans here are. So that is jamesrobbinsfineart.com, and we will take a quick poke around in here, see how you capture the world.
Yeah.
Is this Miss Havisham? No. No, she's too
Yes,
pretty for that. That's Miss
that's
Haversham.
well, yeah. You got to
Wow.
remember, this is the moment she got the letter when she was a young raving
Oh, I
beauty.
see.
But if you go to the that's just to give you a sense of scale. That was me working on it. So it's a 5 foot by 6 foot canvas, I believe.
Boy, oh
Um,
boy.
and if you scooch up,
Yeah.
those three, if you hover over them, you should get portraits. Yeah, so there, go into that one.
Okay.
Portraits and narrative work. And
Boy, oh boy.
oh yeah, I had the opportunity to do RFK Jr. as well for his 70th, a gala for his
Wow.
70th birthday. Yeah, he's
Wow.
been
Look
a
at that
falconer his
falcon.
whole life.
Yeah.
He's written books on
Oh
it, but there she is.
man. Look at
Yeah. If you
that.
click on that little thing in the corner, it'll make it a little bit bigger on the screen.
Okay.
There you go.
Oh boy. Man, dude. Hits me right in the feels. Look at that with the wine and just the boy, oh boy.
It's a,
I
a
love
moment
your
in time.
use of color here. Yeah. Yeah. No, this is solid stuff. So, man, very cool.
Yeah. And that's a recreation of Lady of Shalott.
I love
And
the simplicity of this.
it's a friend of mine, cinematographer. I call it beer and cinematographer.
AKA Adam. Wow.
Yes. And Van Fo. So you see, there's a lot of value in doing master copies, which is why I did both the Lady of Shalott and the Van Gogh. Is you learn a lot when you put these things together. It's like looking at a painting is one thing, but recreating it, you have to walk that path to a certain degree. So I think there's a lot of value to doing those. The Lady of Shalott, the original was in the Tate Gallery when I was in London at college. And every single time I went to the Tate, I found myself gravitating back and sitting in front of that painting. So I thought, I'd like to have my own copy. So
So you've done it. That's cool. I've never thought of it like that before, where someone just goes along and says, you know what, this means a lot to me. I'm going to do my own, and what a precious homage to an artist that you admire. So that's really, and I'm thrilled that you are selling your pieces on here. Can we expect some Stargate pieces to appear here at some point?
I have not put up a Stargate section yet, but my intention is to do so.
Okay.
And then we'll see who yells at me.
Well, once you do that, I'm going to have you back because I know a number of people who have reached out to me over the years saying, you're the only one that I know who's sold the Stargate stuff. And it's like, can I have, this file? And it's like, no, you may not. I'm sorry. That is not happening. So, even when I printed my, this piece out, which is just one of my all-time favorites of yours, I was like, I'm not doing it unless James says yes. So,
and you hit the size almost exact. That's very close to the size of the original.
Exactly. Well, he walks past it in the shot, and it was when it was mounted on the wall after he had finished it, because you had a couple of different versions there, which is really cool about it.
Yeah, I think it's like 22 by 30 or something like that.
Exactly. The Daedalus class is sitting behind his desk. Did you render that as well, or did they take that from a photograph? Because
the Daedalus class,
a
photograph. If it's a photograph, that was probably done through.
I'm sure it's his paint. I'm sure he painted it. So that would be Mark Savella at the time. I'm sure it's Lorne's painting of the Daedalus class, but I was wondering if it had been taken from a photo. I can pull that up.
Yeah, that would have been from Viz would have supplied that.
All right, cool.
I would have thought. I don't know that we did any 3D. I actually remember I'd said I didn't design the Daedalus. It was Peter Benares.
Peter Benares did that. That's correct.
I found two versions that I did do that didn't fly, so to speak.
Well, I hope I get to see those at some point.
I can show you. I can show you at some point. No problem.
Awesome. Yeah.
Maybe they'll go on my site.
Sir.
And I've got that. I've also got a plethora of my original charcoals here. So
The next time I'm in Vancouver, I want to stop by
come on
and
down. Don't wait too
and
long though,
no, I won't. There's this
because
little
I
thing
may be
called
moving to your neck of the woods. We'll see.
really okay.
Well, not, I mean, where are you now? Are you in Tennessee? Where are
I'm
you?
in Nashville now.
Yeah,
I needed to be closer to my folks, so
yeah.
there's things happening. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah, if a lot of that stuff is going to disappear and not move with you, then absolutely, because there's just so
Well, I
much
have
of
to
your
have that
work.
conversation with my wife.
Sure,
That's not
absolutely.
going in the truck. That is not going in the truck.
Oh God, yeah, no, it's your body of work over the years through this franchise. That it cannot be understated just how much of an impact you had on this thing. And I've got Herbal Homo asks, he says, ask an artist. Do you know Loving Vincent, and what do you think about that kind of art? Does that mean anything to you?
No, loving
Loving
Vincent.
Vincent. Let's have a look here. Let me preview it just in case I can't pull it up on the. Ah, it's a crime thriller. A young man comes to the last hometown of painter Vincent van Gogh to
Oh,
deliver the troubled artist's final letter and ends up investigating his final days there. It's a
there was,
crime slash thriller.
but there was one that the whole movie was painted. Is this it?
I have no clue. Let's have a look.
Yeah, I mean, he was amazing, and Lord knows I've done enough self portraits, but nothing in the way that he does.
My,
Yeah,
oh
there you go.
my.
Well, yeah,
Wow.
it's all combined with hand painted original work is what I heard. There were a number of artists employed on that one. Apparently,
I would say
I
so.
do not know the story very well, but I think it's astounding what they did.
Well, I'm adding that to my Netflix queue. I can tell you that right now, wherever it is at least. That's
I mean,
wild.
I can't say if it's a good movie at the end of the day, but I certainly appreciate the fact that they're trying to do a movie representing an artist, and they
Hmm.
actually paint a good portion of the movie. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely. That's a great idea. Matthew Hammond wanted to know how much free reign you had on the aliens from the Daedalus variations in season 5 of Atlantis. So we had this episode where the team was jumping from reality to reality, and we come upon this race of very technologically powerful creatures in one of these realities. Their ship is triangular shaped, very similar in look and design to a star destroyer, in my opinion. And they come on board and they're massive. They're twice the size of Ronon, Jason Momoa. Big gray heads, red protruding thing about their eyes. They, does that ring any bells? Me articulating
Yeah,
it this way? Okay,
yeah,
perfect. Because I was about to sing and dance.
yeah, yeah.
So,
I drew them. I'm pretty sure.
wow. How much when you're creating something like that that are going to appear in just this one-off episode and just intrigue the audience by the possibilities of this other place, that this alternate reality, how much more flexibility are you given in a situation like that, or is it all of a piece? Is it all kind of the same?
Well, no, I think it's the same. There's a workflow no matter what happens. They have a script. This creature came to me in the form of words, and I
Mm,
had to translate that into an image of some sort. And I don't I kind of recall that I had a couple of different versions of it.
okay.
But at the end of the day, yeah, it was going under the skin. They had
Yeah, there
this
was a little
thing on their
protrude. Yeah,
head.
exactly. And right, exactly. That was awfully cool.
Yeah.
There, there were.
So, but all of them, everything went through. It didn't matter if it was just a little blurb or a little bit. The scrutiny. I mean, that said, I did have an inordinate amount of autonomy on the show, especially once it became designer. Um, and Brad even said that. He says, yeah, because I talked to him after the fact, right? I moved on to other shows. We were golfing one time. I said, man, I had a really long leash on Stargate. And he goes, absolutely, you did. But I said, yeah, not finding that on these other shows. It was like thumbprint, thumbprint, thumbprint. Everybody had to get their 10 cents in, and too often it was detrimental in my view. to moving forward with the design. It was just they wanted their thumbprint on it just to have their thumbprint on it, and
okay.
that's counterintuitive, and that's happened in several places since then.
For
No
sure.
names
It's
will
like,
ever be mentioned, but that's
well,
just the way it is. I didn't realize
that's
how good I had it at Stargate.
that is frequently articulated on this program. That precise sentiment. And I had actually had the conversation with Peter Butnaris when he came on. I asked him, do you ever? I think he called it. Someone called it, either him or someone else called it mouse cheese for the mouse, where sometimes they'll put it gets sometimes to the point, depending on whatever office you work in, where they'll introduce things into what they're working on that are so obvious that they're specifically put there because someone who's so insecure about their job has to have their hand in everything will eventually come along and ask for something to be removed, and that can be the thing. And oh, by the way, it was put there for them to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't design throwaways as a rule. I don't have time for it.
Throwaways.
Yeah, I don't have time for that as a rule. I mean, sometimes there was one. Oh my God, which one was it now? It was, I want to say Atlantis. It was Paul Mully's script, Paul and Joe, and they described this creature as half gopher, half squid, and I'm like,
Yeah, that's missing.
What the hell does that look like? Yeah,
pulls it out of the ground.
Yeah. And they get it with a stick, they spear it. And I'm like, okay, well, you got to start somewhere. And the one thing that I will say is no matter how good, bad, close, or not a drawing is, it starts you in a direction. It starts a conversation. So you can get something tangible. Here's an image. And then they could go, no, not like that. So I had.
Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. That's kind of what we're talking about. Joe had that
I
one
have
on his
not
wall.
seen this before.
It's not in any of the shows. That wasn't what made it through.
Oh, I know. I've gone through all the art. But, I've never seen this. So
well, how'd you find? You certainly found it very quickly.
This is called Reddit.
Yeah, well.
So someone has posted it. Look at this.
So I did that more as a joke than anything and showed it to Paul. And then literally he started laughing. And I'm like, well, you said it, half squirrel, half, or half squid, half gopher. So at any rate, that was the start of the real conversation, which led me in the direction he wanted to go. Because he then sat down and went, no. More like, so if I had to change this drawing, how would it change? He said, well, you throw that one out and start an edge, and it looked like this. And then he got very descriptive with me. So
yeah, it was much more like a jelly kind of thing.
Yeah,
it almost lived in the water looking. So
it was a gooey thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, man, that's awesome.
More squid, less gopher.
That's it. One of my favorite, because we're talking about critters. One of my favorite that only had a name off screen because it was canceled was the Nakai. These things were so friggin' cool. I love the look to them. We don't know really what their role was to be later on in the show. Imogen had successfully done the prawns with District 9, and they had literally taken the scaffolding that built the skeleton of the prawns and applied it to the Nakai, and saved you guys apparently tens of thousands in development in the process, because they could just turn around to the skeleton that they had already an asset that they had
new textures. Just add new
textures, fish textures and gelatinous. And I mean, what do you remember creating these things?
Well, I had some very specific direction from Rob Cooper on these. He brought me, he says, have you ever heard of a barrelfish? And I'm like, no. This is apparently some of the tsunamis, these things got washed up. They tend to be very deep water creatures, but they have a translucent head, and you can see their eyes sit back inside the head. They don't have eye sockets per se. And you can see I guess the fish brain and stuff too. But
they live so deep.
If you look up a barrel-headed fish, you'll get what was the initial inspiration for those creatures. And then the body type, they just wanted them to be impossible to be human. So I gave
Mhm.
him this like the backward knees and so thin that there's no way somebody could put a. There you go. That's where I started.
Which is funny because
Pardon me.
they're in their head, and so when we the cameras are on it, we see the person, and so there were human versions of the outfit that Louis Ferreira and Robert Carlyle and Elise Levesque were wearing, and you cut back to the alien creatures, like it's like they have so much more fabric that's on them than that guy actually. But you have to sell the idea because
Yeah,
you're seeing their essence. They're not actually standing there. The creature is standing there. So at that point, that's the story that they're telling. When we see cameras looking in on the rooms, we see the actual thing. But when, generally speaking, but when we're there in front of them, we have the privilege of, or the ability to see the person who is actually standing there.
yeah.
A lot of stuff went into the design of these guys. They were really cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was a really successful rendition of our aliens. Also, the little guys that were on the seed ship. I like them
The
quite a bit.
Ursini.
I did a
Yeah.
few jobs for them too, Ursini, yes. See, you keep all these names present. I'm like, they're just the little guys. Little guys.
The little guys. I love the design of these creatures. I think that like there's a gentle quality to them. We found out that they were ultimately wiped out by these drones in that season. Very
Sad.
bony, very alien looking, but still, I
Yeah.
mean, recognizable with a head and arms and legs. But you definitely could not fit a person in there. And I
No,
think that
no.
was, we're so far out. The ancients did not seed this part of the galaxy with life. You're going to find some aliens.
Yeah. You're going to find stuff that doesn't look and act like us, right down to, I mean, bacterial life, which they
Mhm.
kind of addressed in water.
Yes.
But it
Yeah.
came through and was sucking dry the water tanks in there. There's just a little cloud
The
of
dust
buzzing.
devil.
Yeah,
Yeah. It was left
from
behind
air to
on
water.
the airplane. Right. Exactly.
Came
Yeah. No,
back from the sand dune planet, and then
huh? Also known as New
started
Mexico.
started. Yes,
I've been to White Sands 3 times. I can't
that's
get
a
enough.
big secret. You can only look 3 ways, though. You can't look that way.
That's it. Then you see a highway. This
So
is the
yeah, so
Ursini.
initially, I mean, I came very much off of a reptilian thing for them, and then decided to go full
Whoops.
exoskeleton. So if you had a, you know, exoskeleton that actually looked like bone, what would that happen to look like?
So this
So that's
isn't
what
a suit. This is actually part of them.
no, that's a suit over top. But look at his
I see.
shoulders,
Yeah, for sure.
shoulders and the skull and all that. It's like it's all on the outside.
Man. Yeah, no, you went
Crunchy
through
on the outside, soft and gooey on the
soft on the
inside.
inside. They're nice and friendly. That's why they all got
Yeah,
wiped out. But yeah, there's a
yeah,
couple of phases of this. I don't know if this is a
yeah. That was one of the first renderings that I did.
very tortoise-like, that head.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Tortoise,
It just
lizard.
doesn't stop, man. We
There's
could
one.
sit
There's
here
one
all
other
day.
one that's a full lizard.
Wow. Okay. If it wasn't for Joe taking pictures of these pictures, as of right now, we wouldn't have this stuff. And I'm so thankful for him that, he
Well, there is
went
one
and
other way, except for Universe. I have CD-ROMs. Remember those?
yes.
Actually, yeah. There you go. That was one of the other first ones before I figured maybe they should be bipedal. So,
Wow. You have CDs of this stuff?
oh yeah, I have CDs of everything.
But we've been talking about hard drives for 3 years.
Universe. I lost everything to do with Universe.
And not on CD.
That the CDs are not here in my house anymore. I don't know how that happened, but the hard drives that they were on got toasted, and yeah, I have very little of Universe stuff. I have some,
Yeah.
but certainly not everything, not even close to everything I drew. And I drew probably as much for that 2 years of that show as I did for 5
That's
years of either of the
what
other
makes
incarnations.
That's what makes me sick, man. Because I mean, if you have CDs and I have time, I have
Yeah,
certain technologies, and we can get together
I
and
got a CD player here too.
by our
Believe,
powers
believe,
combined.
believe it or not, an old Sony that I actually used. So, oh my God, how old is it? And it still works.
There
But
you
it was
go,
from the last days of Stargate. That was the last time I used it.
man. It's such a treasure trove of work, and to be able to look back through it with you and be able to discuss some of these details when I come back to Vancouver, and hopefully it will be sooner rather than later. We'll make a day of it and go through a lot of this stuff because there's so much, man. There's just so much.
All you got to do is let me
Um,
know in advance, and I can
I will.
that stuff laid out for you.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and have. I'm starting to the content from December that we built is launching in 27 minutes with a roundtable between Jacqueline Samuda, Tom Macbeth, and Garwin Sanford. And I'm really interested to see how well it does because there were 8 or 9 pieces that we did. And if they do well, we will bring everyone more. If they don't, that boat will probably sink with the Titanic. But there's a lot more uh, to do. And so, Paul Brickler, did James do the Battle of Sateda painting that was in Ronon's room? No, that we're pretty sure probably not. We just kind of established that earlier.
Yeah,
And it,
it's a hard question mark, but it's not totally discounted.
exactly. There we go. I think that's really what I want. Oh, a couple of other Wraith pieces before we go.
Okay.
Let's finish off the Wraith. This one here is their technology. Well,
Yeah,
not the Hive ships.
yeah, it's a USB interface, Wraith
Exactly.
version. Yeah.
That's it. That's
My God,
exactly it.
unbelievable this shit comes back to me.
Right? No, you got it in there. It just has to be referenced. What
Yeah.
I love about the process of this is that you had 2 versions. We had these first, obviously, because we were obtaining and stealing and dealing with their technology, and this is the technology that they had. And then you literally turned around and with the model shop made versions of it that were actual USBs that had adapters in the back so that you could see on screen that we were reverse engineering their tech to make it compatible with ours. Because when you have a foe for that long of time and you have the resources of the United States military, as long as it's not too alien from us, it makes sense that we would have developed that stuff in order to access their data, their material.
Absolutely. And once again, that's all hats off to the model shop. I don't know that I ever drew that version, but they needed it to work that way. So ain't nothing those boys couldn't do, boys and girls.
That's it. And speaking of boys and girls, this
Ooh,
is a
love that one.
child's toy. Yes. To be
Dream
worn by
and
an
Nightmare.
approximate 12-year-old talent. Dream and
Yeah,
Nightmare?
yeah.
Wow. Leather and horse hair.
Let's go play Wraith.
That's it. And you wouldn't have cops and
Yeah,
robbers.
yeah,
You would have humans and that because that's not just their folklore, that's their enemy.
yeah,
And it's one of those really cool design things
yeah.
where, Brad and Rob
That
really
one
thought through
just
this.
yeah. Well, that image just totally came together in one go. There were no amendments really made to it, other than
Wow.
maybe I flattened the nose a bit. It was too much of a human nose. They wanted it flatter, so I spread it out a bit. But ultimately, you're going to put that over a person with a nose. So how
Sure.
much you and I
Yeah.
think they understated the size of the pits in the face on the mask that was actually produced. The teeth were a little bit bigger, but other than that, it was the work that these guys constantly amazed me because they would bring me back something that looked just like that, and I'm like,
Exactly.
oh my God, really? Wow.
They didn't get
So,
close. I wonder oftentimes if they placed bets to how close they could actually get it to look. Because like a lot of my stuff, I sit it down on top of the 11 by 17. What was it? Yeah, and it's exact. Like so many of what it was that you created, so many of those pieces were made to scale on the image, and they just went to town on it in terms of development. The only thing that I can think of that was not exact was you made these ancient ice cream cone stunners for Aurora in season 2, and it was like this little. There was a metal piece on the that was they had hero and they had stunt ones, and there was the it was enclosed under this fogged acrylic, and on the
Yeah.
inside was all of these acrylic pieces together, and in the drawing you can see how they're put together, but in the physical prop it's much more frosted over. And I always wondered, like, I guess that was just a design decision that was made, because you can barely see into the interior of it when it lights on. It glows beautiful, and I love the piece, but in that situation, the front of it they didn't make a carbon copy of, and I guess it was just someone's choice to do it that way.
Yeah, I mean, they ran into, I'm sure, physical issues on creating certain things and making, because you got to, if anything lights up, you got to have somewhere to get the guts into it to make it do so, right?
That's true.
And it needs to have onboard batteries and. So their decision to frost the glass on it might have been driven by the fact that you don't want to see the battery pack, and that's the only place you could go possibly. I mean, I
That's right.
don't specifically remember or know why it was different if it was, but that's something that would make sense to me. They're just like,
Yeah.
with frosted over and it still lights up and everybody's happy at the end of the day. So
Yeah, you make it work with the materials that you have, but more, importantly, the time that you have to pull something off, because like you said, you guys were always running to beat the clock and pull this thing off here for the
yeah,
record.
especially the early years of, yeah. So the early years of Atlantis, obviously the first 2 seasons, I think we did uh 22 episode. Was it 22 or 20?
Atlantis always had 20 a season.
20.
Yeah, you did
So we were
100
doing 40,
episodes in five
we were doing
years.
40 episodes,
Damn.
a year and concurrently. So that's a lot of work for anyone to try and handle. But and that's why, a lot of these things were still spectacular, and they were then in half the time that theoretically they should have been. The model shop people probably have the same um, mindset that I do. It's like all these drawings of mine are, in a way, unfinished drawings because I only had the time to take it so far. And they also, are led by the same timetable. Some of it would be cost. I didn't have to worry about that because my pencil is my pencil, so to speak. But given the time, I'm sure they could have made that exactly like that particular drawing. But there may have also been input. I put the drawing out, and maybe one of the execs said, "Oh, and by the way, when you make this," because also I was privy to every single meeting that went down, obviously. So they would have conversations and say, "Well, we don't want this to be that way. Can you just make this change?" Great, no problem.
Sure.
So I don't know where the diversions from my renderings come, but usually if it's not the same as my drawing, it's somebody further up or down the hall, as it were, had some input there. Or failing all of that, it was just time and money, which are our enemies.
That makes a lot
More
of sense.
than the Wraith.
But it is the same kind of thing. This thing is sucking the life out of you.
It gave me life. Can I tell you? It
go.
gave me life for a decade, man.
Good philosophy. Last question for you, Lockwatcher. James, do you own the images that you created for Stargate? Are they owned by the studio in conjunction with you? How does that work? What, in terms of your contract with Stargate Productions?
Well, you know what? I'm not a lawyer. I assume that MGM / Sony / now Amazon potentially own the IP.
Right.
And I do drawings. And the way I look at it is the drawings that I do that were signed off and sent out to other departments, potentially those versions should belong to the show. Any original drawings that I've done that are my method of thinking, my sketch pads that I have that are full of scribbles and stuff, that's more like my work, my hidden work, if you will. Now, technically, here's the other part that's hard to break down, is because I worked so much time on my own after after the day shut down,
Yep.
but I would say at least a third of it was conceived not on company time. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, like I'm not a
Where does
lawyer,
one end
so
and the other begin? That's what I'm hearing. It's
that's
like
just it. That's
it's
just it.
yeah.
And I think that's why I ran into problems putting out a book. Was just that they MGM was fine with it. They didn't care. Sony had a book division, and they wanted me to pay them an inordinate amount of money up front. I presented to them that we should just make the book and get it out there. It promotes the show. I could make money, they could make money, and I could pay them out of residuals if it was successful enough. They go, that's not how we work.
I think we need to have that conversation with Amazon.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm chatting with a couple of people in the background as well. I'm trying to see what, if anything, I'm able to do about it. I mean, speak to my website. If I put stuff up there and I put out prints for sale, now I've told the world. They're going to come gunning for me, possibly. I don't know. Or maybe they'll just look at it as this all helps to push the Stargate franchise and it's free advertising on that level. So I don't know.
You have 60 viewers who have hung on for nearly 2 hours. That suggests to me that something is working. So,
and they're not football fans.
They're not football fans. No, they're.
Isn't it today?
Or ice skating fans, apparently, with the Olympics.
Is the game today?
It is indeed the big game.
So that's how big a football fan I am.
Exactly right. You know how much in your corner I am. So if there is anything that I can do to help bring this to the table for people, do not hesitate to call me.
No, I won't, and I appreciate that, David. I know you're very invested in all of this on every level.
That's it, man. I mean, stuff that you created. I mean, just sits. And the second episode. Not turn this damn thing on. Put it out. There it goes. All right. Anyway, amazing people have designed so much.
Oh yeah, I think Mr. Godfrey can take credit for that one.
Boyd, yeah, Boyd, for sure.
He was just, and his thumbprints and fingerprints are all over everything, the Cull Warrior and down to just everything. Well, every tablet that came out, he
that's the thing.
Graphics and stuff for it.
I've been trying to get him on, but he's on the water all the time. The fact of the matter is, like, I'm looking at a picture of myself in my digital frame here of me sitting on the ancient steps. I mean, he created that font. I mean, there's so much stuff that he was key for. It's just extraordinary. The talent.
And he made it a translatable, which they discovered later was maybe a mistake. Better to have gibberish that people can't decipher, or you have to worry about what you're actually putting out.
Well, the ice cream cone. This is like the fourth time I've said it on this show. The ancient stunner from Aurora. On the side of it, it says "Made in China."
There you go. Perfect.
Oh God, that's it. There's just a little wink, wink, and nod there. I had who was it? One of the model shop people. He put something in. It was like a name of a girlfriend or something. I can't remember what it was. And he's like, "You'll never find it," but it's on screen for a fair bit. So it's the little things like that make it all worthwhile. Bruce Woloshyn said, we put our kids in everything, in composite shots and all this stuff. They'd bring them in, they'd shoot them into the shot, and they'd take them home. They get the elements for them. You have to. It's like, where does one thing end and the other begin? The artists and the show are on some level one, because it is, right from the writer and the conceptual artist all the straight on up. So it's a cool process.
And now the new one's going to London, my old stomping grounds.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, I haven't got a call yet.
This is true.
I congratulated Brad after I saw your show, you and Darren revealing it with Martin Giro, speaking aloud about it. And I was just like, oh my God, that's so freaking awesome. It's coming back. And to have Brad and Joe as part of it proves that Martin Giro is a really, really smart guy.
And that
I mean, I'm sure
Amazon
he
is willing to
could have tackled the
do.
show entirely as on his own, but
He could have.
Joe and Brad. I mean, you want guys that have led the canon for forever.
That's it.
It's yeah. So they got the greatest team ever, and I don't know. I mean, I can work remotely
For sure. No,
if
I
they need,
think
or I could go back to bloody England where I spent my time growing up. 4 years, mate. 4 years.
wow. Yeah, there you go.
Just
James, thank
painting.
you.
I like to paint. Pleasure.
That's it.
Absolutely, David. As always.
This is tremendous, and hope to have you back really soon here, and keep me in the loop on anything that I can help with. So
Absolutely.
I'm
Been
going
a
to wrap up
pleasure
the show on this
always,
side.
and thanks to all the fans that keep watching and keep this show alive. It's whether I'm involved ongoing or not, it's a great show, and I think it's coming back largely because of the fan base. So
I agree.
kudos to you guys.
Thank you, sir. James C.D. Robbins, production. Oh gosh darn it, James. I apologize. Production designer. Let me get these earbuds off in case he yells at me. Production designer, Stargate SG-1. Universe Atlantis. My name is David Reed. You're watching the Stargate Oral History Project. If you enjoy the show and you want to see more content like this on YouTube, please click that like button. It makes a huge difference to this process, and really helps us get our reach out there to other folks. And if you know a friend who's into Stargate, point us to them. If you hit the subscribe button, it really helps extend the reach as well. But you'll get my notifications of any last minute guest changes, and notifications before any kind of show goes on. My tremendous thanks to my team of moderators who are pulling this episode off on our first weekend back. My thanks is to Anthony and to Kevin for making this one possible. Number of folks involved now are pulling this one off with me in terms of video production, and the folks who are making the archive process on the back end at dialthegate.com possible. We're transcribing every single one of these. We're feeding it into a system that's going to provide an interactive experience for you at some point this year. I'm not going to give an exact date yet because we don't know, but that's what's going on. After this, we've got Jacqueline Samuda, Tom Macbeth, and Garwin Sanford coming up in our first roundtable discussion from Vancouver. It's all about an hour and 45 minutes long, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you enjoy it, share it with some Stargate friends, because then if it does well enough, we may be lucky enough to produce more. But these folks have more stories to tell still. My name is David Reed for the Dial of the Gate. I appreciate you tuning in. Thanks again to James C.D. Robbins. I'll see you on the other side.